Porch light flicker on the siding, moths dancing like they know the tune. Porch light flicker on the siding, moths dancing like they know the tune. Every breath feels borrowed, but tonight the world's in tune. Old chair hums beneath me, plank boards keep the time. Old chair hums beneath me, plank boards keep the time. If this sound ain't perfect, that's how I always mine. Someone left the radio humming low next door. Someone left the radio humming low next door. Static sings the harmony. I couldn't ask for more. Light burn uneven, let the shadows play. Yeah, the porch light burn uneven, keep the night from drifting away.
예, 형 노래 끝나고 뒤로 가는 거예요? 세번에 됐다 하면서 뒤로 들어가.
Porch light burn uneven, let the shadows play. Yeah, the porch light burn uneven, keep the night from drifting away. If this ain't heaven, it'll do for today.
I'm locked in, guess I'm locked in. For a piece of mind, I've been trying to redefine life. I can see the signs, world is gonna see me shine. Fighting for my soul, say, whipping fast, no brakes. Nothing's ever been a waste, now that I've been wide awake. Loops trying to pull me back in. I was stuck for a minute and forgot the passion. Since the lights turned on, it's been camera action. And you start to see it all like a chain reaction. Watch it happen, yeah. Swear that I'ma find my way. Past been gone, I'ma watch it all fade. Whoa, guess I'm going MIA from everybody's problems. Oh, guess I'm locked in, guess I'm locked in. I got this, and it's on my soul. Guess I'm locked in,
front of my mind all day. Sipping herbal in the morning just to feel okay. Had a dream I was water just flowing through space, till I landed on the record that my grandma would play. Talk sweet like jazz in the park after rain. What the grass smell green and the air feels sane. Put the phone on mute, let the silence explain. I don't need much, just a book in the brain. Used to chase things that were run from me. Now I sit still, let the peace come free. Paint a verse in the sky with a loose leaf. While the moon do a dance with a soft oak tree. Let it ride, let it be, let it be what it be. Got a breeze in my chest and a thought run free. I don't rush, I don't race, I just float on three. Got a vibe in my soul, got a life on key. Let it ride, let it breathe, let it roll like that. Got the world in my cup and the beat in the back. I don't stress, I don't fold, I just lean on facts. If the sun don't shine, I'ma still bounce back. I've been good, I've been gone, I've been lost in the loops. Got a hoodie and some headphones, walking with truths. Ain't no inches in the feed, just noise and flex. But I found God once in a vinyl set. Talk slow when I speak, let the moment stretch. Learn peace ain't found, it's a thing you protect. Yeah, I vibe like water, I change and shift. But the roots still deep like my grandma's grits. City move fast, but I drift like smoke. Let the rhythm in my chest be the way I cope. Wrote a song for the days that feel soft and broke. Why the healing don't shout, but it still got hope. Let it ride, let it be, let it be what it be. Got a breeze in my chest and a thought run free. I don't rush, I don't race, I just float on three. Got a vibe in my soul, got a life on key. Let it ride, let it breathe, let it roll like that. Got the world in my cup and the beat in the back. I don't stress, I don't fold, I just lean on facts. If the sun don't shine, I'ma still bounce back. Let it ride, let it be, let it be what it be. Got a breeze in my chest and a thought run free. I don't rush, I don't race, I just float on three. Got a vibe in my soul, got a life on key. Let it ride, let it breathe, let it roll like that. Got the world in my cup and the beat in the back. I don't stress, I don't fold, I just lean on facts. If the sun don't shine, I'ma still bounce back.
I've been going out of my way for us, and I'm not okay. The sun ain't gon' shine all day. Can't wait to see it on your face. Girl, you know, gotta do better than walking out and dodging the surface. Every day I've been out praying my baby not hurt. All of the weather we doing, I promise it's worth it. Open the curtains, baby, I'm certain. I want it all, we come in, it's a coupe, and we gon' bring it right back. Tell him, man, you know I'm suited, but I ain't never gon' slack. I had to study the map, I had to find where I'm at. The legend, a symbol of that. Symbols, I ain't gonna crash. Catch me in the cut, hun. Something like the duck running. I ain't coming with nothing. I know what they want from it. I can spot the fake loving. Rolling up the gates on it. Ain't no debating on it. It got legs like cake, honey. Usher, I'm skate on the beat. I done seen the play cross the feet. God drive like 6 V's. Flow sick, give me 6 feet. Mountain climbing out to hit a peak. Bunch of snow in my seat, it ain't the same no more. Life is everything but the beach, like a chain. I'm a lean with your lady for sure. Gotta do better than walking out and dodging the surface. Every day I've been out praying my baby not hurt. All of the weather we doing, I promise it's worth it. Open the curtains, baby, I'm certain. I want it all, we come in, it's a coupe, and we gon' bring it right back. Tell him, man, you know I'm suited, but I ain't never gon' slack. I had to study the map, I had to find where I'm at. The legend, a symbol of that. Symbols, I ain't gonna crash. I've been going out of my way for us, and I'm not okay. The sun ain't gon' shine all day. Can't wait to see it on your face. Girl, you know, gotta do better than walking out and dodging the surface. Every day I've been out praying my baby not hurt. ayy. All of the work that we doing, I promise it's worth it, ayy. Open the curtains, ayy. Baby, I'm certain,